So, would you please kindly take your seat, and we will shortly start our last concluding session of this 2.5 day seminar. So, this is a concluding session of our seminar. So, I would like to request Annie Mukherjee to come to the podium, and she has been our rapporteur for the last 2.5 days. So she will be giving us a brief report of the points that have been raised, the issues that have been covered by our seminar presenters. And I would also like to request Professor Amita Chatterjee to come over the podium and to say a few words as a way of concluding this grand seminar that we had. So Amita, please, and Annie, please.
No, I don't. I just... Acha. All right. So I have been given the task of rapporteuring, and I have never done this before. And my notes are extremely scattered here and there, so I might fumble a little. So please bear with me. Over these last 2 days, we have heard about different topics exploring the realm of the mental. We have questioned about the place of the mind in this world, of the relationship between mind and consciousness, of how we come to know ourselves and others, the various questions that arise when we consider self-knowledge and the knowledge of other minds, the role of emotions, etc. We started with Professor Ganeri's absolutely brilliant keynote address, where he reflected on Pessoa's philosophy of the self. He talked about virtual subjects in reference to Pessoa's heteronyms and took us through explorations of virtual realities and mindscapes. Professor Ganeri portrayed Pessoa not only as one of the great modernist writers, but also as an important philosopher through his exploration of heteronymic philosophy of self, and how he developed his phenomenological approach to selfhood. In doing so, he drew insights from various philosophers and the works of different literary personas. To start with yesterday, at the very beginning, we heard about the relation between embodiment and consciousness. With the help of the story of Nachiketas from the Kathopanishad, we understood how being is not in conflict with knowing when the intention is pure, and is not in opposition with the process of knowledge, and how Nachiketa represents being that is joyful, brave, and sees truth on face. We saw and talked about the experiential self that has the capability to go deeper and reflect in a complex and focused manner. Then we also heard about the Buddhist non-self and inner world realism, and whether subjectless consciousness is possible given the Buddhist non-self. How can consciousness be ultimately real if one retains this Buddhist ideal of the non-self? Can the occurrence of a cognition or consciousness event be said to have an intrinsic nature? And if not, would this amount to vindication of the realism about the self? And in this context, there was also discussion about the claim that cognition is reflexive in nature and about higher order thought account. Then we moved on to explore if Advaitic metaphysical monism can be considered as a way out of the dualist hypothesis. Advaita Vedanta has accepted the primacy of consciousness as a metaphysical reality and has derived the reality of the physical universe from the absolute reality of consciousness. We saw how if we accept the Advaitic standpoint, we can resolve the mind-matter dualism by showing that consciousness is a metaphysically absolute reality which can explain everything else, including the physical universe and human existence, and how we can avoid materialist monism in this case. Then we explore the modes of conceptualizing the mental, drawing the insights from the causal, the teleological, and phenomenological theorization of the consciousness of the mind or the mind. Whether naturalistic accounts, either teleological or biological, have limitations when such conceptualizations are considered. We reflected on Husserl's ideas 1 and 2 and addressed Husserl's discussion of the ego and the constitution of material nature, as well as the constitution of psychic reality through the body, and how we can have an adequate understanding of the worldly phenomena. How Husserl's phenomenology differs from Descartes' kind of skepticism, and if his philosophy is free from the preconceived notions of the world, etc. Then we went through Dennett's heterophenomenology, the study of phenomena of others, how the study of consciousness can be freed from first-person point of view and bring it to the third-person point of view, and can be brought back to the third-person point of view. Questions were raised if heterophenomenology is nothing but a rhetorical tool and fails as a method to study the first-person phenomenal aspect of our experience. Proposals of collective intentionality were considered, and proposals that ascribe priority to the community were addressed. Questions were raised about what it means to belong to a collective, and whether group identity exhaustively defines one's identity about who one is. How is the I and the we related? Are there good reasons to reject an aggregative account of community? We have concentrated on self-portraits as forms of self-assertion and how they invite us to be immersive aesthetes whilst retaining the dichotomy between the artist herself and the painting that one is portraying. How the understanding of the first person and third person is special in self-awareness, and considered criticisms of aesthetic and epistemic purism on self-knowledge and self-awareness. How self-portraits show that artists cannot be anonymous and is present with all of his or her history. Our emotions-based aesthetic theory is culture-specific. We looked at the representation of variety of emotions through the reference to ancient literary texts. We looked at how Nati Shastra explores emotions in the context of human well-being. In this account, the understanding of emotions was connected to the Purusharthas. There have also been discussions of self-knowledge as metacognition, as well as critiques' viewpoint regarding the very possibility of self-knowledge itself, and try to make sense of rational agency, commitment, and first-person authority in general light of self-knowledge. Continuing with self-knowledge, we asked whether it is the primary requirement for moral agency, how self-knowledge, at least in an implicit sense about one's own beliefs and desires, becomes an integral part of being a moral agent. I will now briefly talk about today's lectures. I'm sorry, my notes are a little scattered, as I mentioned. In Professor Sutto's lecture, we had an overview of enactivism as understood today and discussed the core commitments of enactivism. Enactivism is interesting because it says cognition occurs in living systems and not machines. And what we were discussing what enactivism means by organisms bringing forth their worlds. They think of cognition as organisms continuously engaging with significant environments, and what raises challenges to cognitivism, why enactivism should be preferred, and so on. In Professor Chatterjee's lecture, we saw that we discussed if emotions interfere with rational choice, and how this view is mainly attributed to Plato, but as she said, this is a wrong attribution, and talked about his condemnation of emotion not being total, not total condemnation of emotions. Intellectual elements aren't always enough in making good or right choices. Emotions are useful in decision making, even without the control of reason. Emotions evolved because it gave our ancestors, helped our ancestors to build adaptive responses, efficient, effective adaptations, and so on. And she showed us how emotions don't always lead us astray, even without the bounds of reason, and paves the way for advantageous outcome. Then we discussed Spinoza's theory of other minds in Professor Guo's lecture. And she takes us through the problem of solipsism and the epistemological problem of other minds. She discussed the two meanings of pantheism and the idea of how God can be the totality of all existing things. And is this totality of things real and unified? How pantheism indicates, if pantheism indicates panpsychism, And if it is so, then the problem of other minds stands solved, and if it doesn't, then the problem takes a new ontological form. She discussed in Spinoza's scheme of philosophy, a single substance view is not a single mind view, and how substance monism and modal pluralism go parallelly in Spinoza. In Professor Sebastian's lecture, we explored epistemology of subjectivity and subjectivity itself. In J. Garfield's and Nalini Bhushan's paper, we discussed about epistemology of subjectivity and subjectivity itself through K.C. Bhattacharya's analysis of moksha in Advaita and its spiritual significance, and saw that this provides the key to understanding what he means when he identifies subjectivity with freedom, how it is a modern defense of Advaita Vedanta at its core, how subject itself is freedom and self-knowledge is illumination of this freedom, and how this project can be seen as a spiritual one was also discussed. I'm sorry this was the paper discussed yesterday, but I missed it. And we have reflected on Buddhist moral commitments with reference to Shantideva's Bodhacharya Vatara, and reflected on compassion as the fundamental moral value in Professor C.D. Sebastian's paper, where empathy emanating from compassion is a genuine commitment which makes one have moral cognition, resulting in thought, speech, and action. In Professor Sarkar's paper, we saw interconnections between self-knowledge and moral agency, and how we can become moral agents without being self-reflective. In Moral Dilemmas, the agent consciously reflects on her moral beliefs, thus reflecting on self-knowledge. And this desire enables to connect one's own beliefs and desire sets to one's actions. Freedom of action implies self-knowledge, and she explores the nature of association between determinism and free will. The incompatibilist and the compatibilist views were considered. Moral intuitions and self-reflection was considered. In Suchitra's paper, Suchitra focuses on the interplay between emotion and language, highlighting how language shapes emotion concepts, which in turn shapes emotions. In favor of this claim, this paper draws evidences from neuroscience and psychology, and also divulges the role of metaphors in understanding, describing, and experiencing emotion episodes. And Professor David Bain's paper focuses on pain asymbolia, where pain is not unpleasant. Professor Bain says we can give up the claim that all pains hurt. We can replace it with the neutrality claim that some pains are neutral, some pains don't hurt. He further says pain asymbolics have two features, that is pain indifference and general threat indifference, and the explanation to this comes from care lack. Nilambar questions the role of idea of impersonal subjectivity and promotes the first personal presence while experiencing any aesthetical object. And in my own paper, I tried to see whether we can apply the experimental methodology, a new evolving methodological movement, to the age-old debate of theory simulation, which forms an important part of the theory of mind, and whether we can establish philosophical hypothesis by following this methodology. And this kind of sums up of the topics that we have been discussing through these 3 days. I have learned a lot, and thanks to all the esteemed speakers for their very valuable insights. And this is what I had to say. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Annie, for helping us in more than one ways. And so now I would like to request Professor Amita Chatterjee to say a few words as a way of concluding this wonderful seminar that we had. Professor Chatterjee, please.
A few words. I'm very honored by this request, but I'm humbled too, because I don't think that I'm competent enough to give any, concluding discourse. And still, since I have been requested, I'm making an attempt to do that. So the experience for the last 2.5 days had really been exhilarating, and as the hands of the clock moved, we found more and more layers and more aspects of the mental realm, and we are really, flooded with questions and problems, and we are going back with a lot of enthusiasm to research, look into these topics and look into them, more carefully, more deeply, and more profoundly. So I would like you to think an imaginary scenario. Suppose you see 5 discrete dots on a piece of paper on a whiteboard. Immediately you will start wondering, why these dots? Your inbuilt curiosity will not let you stop here. Next you will ask, what do they stand for? If someone knowledgeable gives you the names of objects they stand for, you will pose the next question, and then the next after next. And what kind of objects are they? How do they function? What do we do with them? Can these dots be connected? Given a large number of possible connections, how do we suppose to choose amongst them? Can these be brought under one umbrella, one overarching frame? Only after receiving an affirmative answer to the last question, you may pause for some time. Here, instead of 5 dots, we are given 5 concepts by the organizers of our seminar. Say mind, body, brain, consciousness, and emotions. Incidentally, none of these has been unanimously defined, and philosophers and scientists have attempted to connect these concepts in different ways, and just simply by looking at the formula of permutation and combination, you can find out how many different ways actually these 5 can be combined, even when we are not considering the complexities inbuilt into these concepts. And after determining the initial meaning of these concepts, philosophers have been trying to offer theories. So we have innumerable theories in philosophy of mind and the related areas, and we find that in the Western world, which has also percolated to the Indian scenario, a new science of mind which has come up, have already traversed 3 different waves, and starting with, say, computational theory of mind and connectivist theory of mind, we are now dealing with the embodied mind and extended mind. And similarly, we find that in the Indian context also, there are lots of theories. But the ideas that have been explored during the seminar has given us, some general features of the Indian way of philosophizing on this concept of mind. We found that Indian philosophers, when they theorized on these concepts of mind, body, brain, consciousness, and emotions, especially in the classical systems, all these concepts were dealt at person level using the vocabulary eminently suitable for expressing human experiences. And they didn't enter into, say, any neurophysiological account or any other kind of exploration, but whatever could be concluded on the basis of our experiential generalization. And we found that there were, naturalists and non-naturalists and alike. There were spiritualists and materialists. there were monists and there were pluralists, and all of them had something to say on this particular area, and also have shed some lights on them. And it is not possible to summarize or enter into all these things. But I would just like to say that if one wants to begin from the scratch, there are two established take-off points. One may either begin from mind or from body. One may either begin from mind or consciousness. The starting point of different versions of the Upanishadic monism is mind or self, and which is of the nature of consciousness, and that of the Charvaku materialist is body, constituted by 4 material elements: earth, water, fire, and air. Spiritualists who have their base in the Upanishads or Upanishadic monism later developed in the hands of the proponents of different schools of Vedanta. It is interesting to note that hardcore spiritualist systems also admitted the significant role that body and bodily properties play in our empirical existence. Since we have been talking about embodiment, and I think that it is important to look at the concept of body as has been propounded in different Indian systems. And however, in all these systems, including the 19th century transformations of the Upanishadic monism, attempts at transcending the bodily constraints of our empirical existence in order to participate in the exalted life of eternal bliss were evident. Sri Aurobindo, for example, integrated the material, the bodily, the vital, the psychical, the mental, and its higher stages with the supernatural, the essence of which is existence, consciousness, and bliss, in his narrative of emergent evolution. And he has shown as the human mind climbs higher and higher peaks, egocentric emotions are eliminated, making room for experiencing the most exalted emotions associated with the delight of existence. In his scheme, mind, body, brain, consciousness, and emotions are interrelated and interdependent. Each has a value of its own, no doubt, but spirit or consciousness remains the source, the end, and the guiding principle of creative evolution. We have heard a lot about Kesavacharya, and Kesavacharya was acknowledged as the most original and creative Indian philosopher of the colonial period, and he offered a scheme of interrelating body and bodily properties with consciousness, emotions, and subjectivity solely from our own perspective. Following the Vedanta tradition, he gave an account of graded consciousness and alternative ways of realizing the absolute through the process of dissociation. According to him, our feeling of body from within, or our bodily subjectivity, gives us the first taste of freedom by dissociating itself from all objects surrounding it, and serves as the ground of higher stages of subjectivity. Psychic subjectivity, to which we have access through introspection, urges us to dissociate mental or psychic states from their intentional contents, say images, ideas, and thoughts that possess merely quasi-objectivity. He distinguished amongst various levels of introspection to show that each would lead to greater freedom from objectivity. Bhattacharya maintained that in feeling, one is completely free from objectivity, and one experiences the subject as freedom, not limited by any objective constraint. He designated the subjectivity realized through feeling spiritual subjectivity, because he held that attaining absolute freedom from objectivity was a spiritual demand. Thus, by dissociating consciousness gradually from objectivity of all kinds, one reaches the final stage. So one was the process of integration. Here we find the process of dissociation. And it is true that in Bhattacharya's scheme of mind, body, brain, consciousness, and emotions, all are important players. But to reach the highest form of freedom, body and the bodily, finally falls by the wayside. Another proponent of the Upanishadic monism, our Nobel laureate poet Rabindranath Tagore too, highlighted the role of body in the onward march of humanity toward perfection, toward greater and richer realizations of unity, love, and freedom. Tagore was much impressed by Darwin's theory of evolution, yet in his Hibbert Lectures of 1930, he presented a vision of humanity going beyond physical evolution of responding to the call of the eternal spirit that dwells deep in the human heart. It inspires in human beings a spirit of supreme sacrifice in the midst of their self-centered lifestyle. During earlier part of evolution, the struggle for survival was mainly decided by size and strength of body, till the coming of humans who started ruling over the roost by their wit and intelligence. Human body and brain evolved sufficiently to pluck and eat the fruits of the tree of knowledge. Tagore writes, it is the consciousness in man of his own creative personality which has ushered in this new regime in life's kingdom. This consciousness finds its manifestation in science, philosophy, and the arts, in social ethics, in all things that carry their ultimate value in themselves. Of all creatures, said Tagore, man lives in an endless future of which our present is only a part. From individual body to community, and from community to universe, from universe to infinity, this is the soul's normal progress. Thus, Tagore also places consciousness and soul at a higher rung than brain and body. Swami Vivekananda, like other Vedantins, placed consciousness at the apex, but he did not deny the world, nor did he disparage the body. His is a philosophy of selfless work, which we cannot perform without a body, or by disparaging the worldly attitude. So he says that we are to work by giving up the apparent elusive world. We are to work by seeing God everywhere. He said, desire to live 100 years, have all earthly desires if you wish, only deify them, convert them into a heaven. If a man plunges headlong into the foolish luxuries of the world without knowing the truth, he has missed his footing. He cannot reach the goal. And if a man curses the world, goes into a forest, mortifies his flesh, and kills himself by starvation, makes his heart a barren waste, kills out all feelings, and becomes harsh, stern, and dried up, that man also has missed the way. These are the two extremes, the two mistakes at either end. Both have lost the way, both have missed the goal. So work, says Swamiji, putting God in everything and knowing him to be in everything. And just like the Buddha, he has also asked us to follow the golden means. So this is the trajectory that we find the monist thinkers, Upanishadic inspired thinkers have taken. And this is how they evaluated body. But we have some pluralist schools in our system. For example, Navaishishika, Mimamsa, the Buddhists, the Jains, they all have began with the concept of the embodied mind. And I would like to focus on the Navaishishika concept of the embodied mind because nobody has talked about it in this seminar. It is true that in their metaphysics they enumerated different kinds of entities, say soul, self or Atma, body, sharir, sense organs or indriyo, objects of experience or artha, knowledge or buddhi, inner sense or manas, etc. A summary account of these metaphysical entities will show that all these kinds of knowable objects are interrelated. Here, Atma is the seer of all things, enjoyer of all things, knows and experiences. Body is the site of all sorts of experiences, including enjoyment and suffering. The sense organs are the means of knowledge as well as enjoyment. Manas is the internal sense organ with the help of which we introspect our inner states. Volition is that which leads to physical and mental acts. Affection, aversion, and stupidity are listed as doshas or faults. Transmigration or pratyabhava means the series of births and deaths through which an individual soul travels until attaining liberation. Birth means connection of a body, soul with body, senses, and so forth. Death means their dissociation. Consequences of activities are mainly of two types, pleasure and pain. This is the Nyaya account of all possible experiences of soul. The means of release from the cycle of life and death is the correct knowledge of different types of entities, which enables one to distinguish between self from not self. This paraphrase from the first commentary of the older Nyaya treatise makes it evident that if the excellence of an individual lies in its knowledge, its sentience, its attempt to avoid painful existence, it cannot be an abstract essence, a soul minus its bodily entrapments. It has to be a self-body continuum, immersed and engaged in meaningful pursuits of life in its journey towards emancipation, towards absolute cessation of all sufferings. Self, according to this school, cannot be individuated without a body, and hence, violation of body amounts to the violation of self, the entire being. And so we know that this worldview is entirely cognition-centric, and the Nyayikas have stated that our body is not the mere container of ourself, but it actively shapes the cognitive life of an individual. Even when dissociated from a body, the prospect of the mental life of an individual is determined by the contingency of its relationship with the body. As stated in the Vaisheshika Sutra, desire or raga is also determined by particular biological kind. Desires are conditioned and determined by one's biological body. Human beings having human body possess human desires. Other animals having other kinds of body have different animal desires. From the Vatsyayana Vaishya on Nyaya Sutra, it becomes obvious that the relationship between soul or self and body is much more intimate than the simple container-contained relation. Body is the locus or residence or the home of the senses, and senses in their turn are said to be the instruments of experience. That means when one wills to obtain something which one desires, it is the body where an action occurs. The body is also said to be the locus of the senses, because senses are benefited by the benefit of the body and are harmed by the harming of the body. And this claim can be sustained with an example of visual perception, which can be extended to any other kind of perception up to manasa pratyaksha or mental perception. And so we find that perception being the basis of all other types of cognition, it follows in this system that human cognition is without exception body-based. So I'm not saying that they are really celebrating the possession of body, but embodiment in a very significant sense is there at the center of the Nyaya universe. And when actually we go out of this bodily entrapment, we have our liberation. In the Vaisheshika literature, a disembodied state of liberation is allowed as a formal possibility. But in the disembodied state, all mental capacities are lost. There does not remain any conscious thought, sentience, or intellectual activity. because a connection between the souls and the body is the generic cause of all cognitions and affections. Many have objected to this narrow idea of liberation, which results in a state disconnected from everything, good or bad. The Vedantins raise the question, what sensible person would want or strive to attain this final state, which is unconscious and cut off from all pleasure? Who would be motivated to strive for losing sentience or being perpetually in a state of coma? It has been said in a popular verse that being a jackal in the Vrindavana would be far more preferable than attaining liberation in the Nyaya sense. The Nayayikas retorted that any sensible person would strive for the final state, which is not only free from pleasure, but also from the possibility of all sorts of pain. Besides, there's no good argument to back the hypothesis that a self without a body ever experiences joy or bliss. Liberation in Nyaya then consists in pure existence or swarupa sthiti of the self, which it is when it is dissociated from all its distinctive qualities, including consciousness and sentience, with which self is endowed in its phenomenal existence. This view indirectly entails that harming a body amounts to harming itself, which provides the sufficient ground for inculcating self-respect, respect for others, and empathy for all beings in our environment. To establish this point, I would like to mention a very radical and uncommon Nyaya view which has been developed by Pandit Badrinath Shukla. Probably this view gives the maximum credence to the embodiment thesis. Pandit Shukla calls his view Dehatmavada, but it is different from the Chavako view and upholds the non-standard view that one need not possess an eternal self or Atman to be a practicing Nayayika. The concept of a body with manas is sufficient to serve all the purposes for which the classical Navaishishka philosophers posited self. The living human body can be the ground in which properties like cognition or consciousness, desire, pleasure, pain, even accumulated merits and demerits inhere. These properties cannot be specific qualities of the body. However, nothing prevents them from being general properties or samanya gunas inhering in the body. It is not necessary for general qualities to be constituted by the same kind of material elements of which the body is constituted. Thus, they do not evolve from matter through the process of transformation within the constituents, nor need they be similar to the physical or bodily properties. It appears that this view will be able to bypass many of the problems associated with emergentism. What Shukla has actually been proposing is that, like the general quality of rupa and buddhi, etc., consciousness also inheres in the body as long as the body lasts. This is undoubtedly a celebration of embodiment. However, it does not tell us to have no truck with the normative. Since this view does not bring along any promise for a future life, it has the distinct advantage of inspiring a person to lead a commendable, unselfish life. All improvements, excellences that a person looks forward to have to be attained in this life. Shukla concludes by saying, in the Atman doctrine, the temptation of postponing a good action and leaving it for another life is very strong. A man is more likely to pursue mean and selfish ends under the scheme than under the scheme of Dehatmavada. Dehatmavada is consequently not only more rational but also more moral. So this is the theory of embodiment that we find in the Navaishishika naturalist philosophy. So from this 2.5 day seminar, what are we taking back home? What are our take-home points? We find that, we have been told time and again that a stage has reached when we have to go beyond all kind of binaries or distinctions which have been prevalent in the classical philosophy of mind. And the theory of embodied and situated cognition have really turned our focus to a completely different kind of philosophy, have emphasized, say, different saliences, and we find that we need to go beyond the distinction between the mind and the body, the binaries between the brain and the mind. We need to extend the boundaries of cognition and emotion beyond the boundaries of individual organism. We need to have social and social cognition and social emotions and intentionality instead of only individual intentionality. And so we need to break down the barrier between the natural and social, and also the gap between the inner and outer. So the insights that we are taking back is this: we need to rethink the entire framework of doing philosophy of mind, going beyond all kinds of binaries and arriving at, say, completely different new, say, kind of concepts and saliences, and a nuanced discourse on that kind of journey will take us to greater and greater heights. And that demands, of course, some kind of, say, interdisciplinary collaboration. And this seminar has seen the collaboration amongst different disciplines, and we are taking back insights from these deliberations and collaborative efforts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Chatterjee, for your very, very, insightful comments and the take-home messages that we can work on in our further intellectual journey out of this seminar. So now we have, reached the stage where we have to wind up this seminar. So, just the other day I was looking at a prayer that we find in Taittiriya Upanishad, where the teacher is praying, Amayantu brahmacharina swaha, bimayantu brahmacharina swaha, pramayantu brahmacharina swaha, damayantu brahmacharina swaha, shamayantu brahmacharina swaha. Shankaracharya in his commentary writes that actually teacher is praying that let students from all the different directions come to me and we can discuss the Atma Tattva or Brahma Jnana. So I think slightly modifying this Upanishadic prayer, we can say that scholars from different directions have arrived and have shared their ideas, thoughts with us. We had scholars from Canada, from USA, from UK, from mainland Europe, from Australia, and of course from different corners of our country, India. So I, on behalf of myself, as well as on behalf of the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture, I convey my sincere thanks to all of them for taking some time out of their very, very busy schedule and for giving us the opportunity of listening to their enlightening lectures. I must especially mention Professor Janardhan Gannery's beautiful keynote address, which actually set the tone of the seminar. He has flown all the way from Toronto to be with us, on this occasion. And of course, we have Professor Mark Sideritz with us, who has flown all the way from New York, just the other day, to be with us and, to share his analysis of some of the Buddhist doctrines that we listened to the other day. And of course, all the scholars from India, and of course the online presentations, because all of them are really very busy with many engagements, and some of them had to wake up quite early in the morning to adjust to our schedule. So I I convey my sincere thanks to all of them for being kind enough and for opening up new vistas for us. And also you might have noticed that we have also a few young budding philosophers with us. We have research scholars from IIT Bombay. We have research scholars from Jadavpur University, and who really shared with us their research findings. So this is something that we are extremely happy about, and we hope that they will carry on their research further. And of course, I must appreciate, and I must convey my sincere regards to Swami Suparnanandaji, Secretary of Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture, for his constant guidance, help, cooperation, advice, and whatnot. And of course, the Center for Indological Research and Studies, the wonderful, staff of this center, under the able leadership of Swami Tadbratanandaji. They have been working so hard and always with a smiling face. They are the ones who are responsible for, for all the details, the results of which we have been, enjoying for the last 2.5 days, our transportation, our food, our accommodation, and whatnot. So I really, sincerely thank everybody in this Center for Indological Studies and Research in Ramakrishna Mission for their help. I really cannot resist this temptation of making this statement. I mean, this Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture is perhaps one of the unique institutions in India which has been able to maintain its integrity, rigor, Catholicity since its inception in 1950s. And this is no mean an achievement in a country like India. And all these due to the dedication, the openness, the sadhana of the Swamijis that who run this kind of institution. So, let us, end this wonderful intellectual feast that we had for the last 2.5 days, echoing the Upanishadic prayer, Sahana bhavatu, sahano bhunaktu, sahaviryam karavavahi, tejasvina vadhitamastu, ma vidvishavahi. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. And last but not least, thank all the participants, everybody who have raised questions, comments, or who have encouraged us through their silent participation, without whom this seminar could not be what it is today. So thank you very much again all.